Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
I'm so grateful for you taking a few moments of your time to join me, Randall, on this edition of Around with Randall. I had an interesting conversation recently with a client, in particular, a group of younger, up-and-coming, philanthropic industry professionals who I think, for the most part, are going to be really amazing leaders someday. But they asked some really basic questions about the legality of nonprofit work. And it caused me to think that I tend to deal with senior development leadership or fundraising foundation leadership, chief development officers, even into legal and compliance, certainly into CEOs of universities, chancellors, presidents, CEOs of healthcare, hospital and systems, CEOs of social service agencies. And I sometimes forget that not everybody knows the true basics of how to make a foundation and the execution of the work legal. So today I want to level set, spend just a few minutes talking about some of the broad strokes that I just take for granted that everybody knows. And that's really poor on my part, is we all could use a reminder about some of the basic principles about what makes nonprofit work effective when it's done in a legal way. So I want to cover some wide swatches from duty of care, the three principles or the three duties, to kind of a very, very high level of 990s. And then we're going to kind of jump into some policies and procedures that can probably be helpful, whether you're big or small, that you probably should be looking at on a more regular basis. So why is this important? Let's start with maybe one of the basic tenets here. The thing that we have in the nonprofit world that we need to realize is our most important asset is actually not our people. They're number two. The thing that gives us the ability to do what we do is trust. Trust with the community, trust with our donors, community leaders, volunteers. If we are a standalone foundation supporting an organization or a development office in an organization, everybody who works in the organization doesn't understand what we do. If we lose trust, we lose all the key elements, aspects of what's truly important. And what we end up with, to be candid, is a lot of conversation without a lot of money, connection, because people say, why would I give to that? I don't trust them. There's an old adage, which I tend to use quite often with leadership to always maybe keep in mind, no money, no mission. And if you lose the trust of your community, of your donors, based on the fact you didn't do some basic legal things, it really sets you back. And I think we all can understand that. So this conversation today is all about trust and what we have to do to ensure we have it at a baseline level. And not just individually, I mean organizational wide. So let's start at the top. The primary responsibility of a board member, for sure, of key leadership, and basically anybody inside the organization from a legal perspective. And this probably mostly applies to board members who have a governance responsibility, and certainly an executive team, starting with the CEO. There are three basic duties that in many states are codified, meaning the legislature and the governor legislature passed, governor signed laws that say these three things have to be preeminent in everything that you do as a fiduciary, as someone who's ultimately responsible. And the way I put it is boards are the owners. They're the owner representatives of the community. There are three duties: duty to care, for loyalty, and duty of obedience. So what are these three things? And by the way, all too often, you ask a board about these three, they have no clue. But yet their state may have passed laws that make it important for them to understand what these duties are. The first is duty of care. And that's really deals with the level of competency that the average, ordinary, prudent person would do whatever it is that you did or you should do. That when you think about the general thought process of responsibility, that you're doing the basics and that the standard in the law is the ordinary person. What would the ordinary person do in this circumstance? And so duty of care is about making sure that you're doing the bare minimum. And obviously, we'd like a heck of a lot more when you are a leader or have some type of responsibility. The second is duty of loyalty. And this means that it's an undivided allegiance to that organization. A little more detail here. This is where conflict of interest statements are really important. So many boards have a conflict of interest policy. There's a reason why, because the 990, first of all, says you should have one. It asks you in one of the sections, hey, you have these policies. Number two is best practice. But what I find most often is missing is a conflict of interest statement and signature page, meaning that every year the board member is signing a document that says, I will have a duty to this organization and not create a conflict of interest. And conflict of interest is this wide term, meaning that something gets in the way of them executing their job. Easy examples include they own a lawn service and let's say the foundation or governance board, doesn't make a difference, is trying to hire someone to cut the lawn, and the decision comes before the board and you own the lawn service. It doesn't mean you have to resign from the board. It just means you have to stand up and leave and abstain from involvement in that decision because you have a conflict. And this comes up with kids who are working in the organization. This comes up with contracts being offered. The chair of the board at the Nebraska Medical Center, where I worked before going into consulting, the chair of the board was owned the bank that managed all of our retirement. So this was a non-philanthropic conflict of interest. Every year when there was a conversation about, do we continue with the different investment opportunities for employees, 401ks, Roth 401ks, all of that, he literally would hand the gavel to the vice chair and he'd go out in the hallway. He'd have no idea what was going on in the room. It's about no personal gain. It's about you can't benefit from a decision the organization makes. And you should have this conversation every year with not only boards, but leaders, and have them sign something saying, I will make sure that I understand the conflict of interest. And if it arises, I will abstain and remove myself from the conversations. Duty of loyalty. The last is duty of obedience, which is faithfulness to the true mission of the organization. You're not going to allow the organization, either as a leader, a volunteer, or employee, executive leader, push the organization into places it shouldn't go based on its mission, and or change the mission to meet where you want to go and be honest about it. So duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience are all about these basic essence that in many ways we all should have as leaders. There should be a policy and a statement and a signature that fully defines what these things are. And if you're doing that, you'd be surprised how simple governance gets in terms of operating the organization in a legal sense. So that is the broad. As we begin to move down into the specific, I want to spend just a minute talking about the IRS Form 990. When 990s began many decades ago, they were kind of afterthoughts. And it wasn't until the tax reforms really coming out of Sarbanes-Oxley in 2008 and 9 that the 990 began to grow in the nonprofit space to match the requirements really run by Barney Frank, the senator from Massachusetts, said, I'm willing to keep politically nonprofits out of Sarbanes-Oxley, which is the for-profit version of requirements for reporting for companies. But they're going to have to step their game up. And that's when the new 990 forms came out in 2009, 10, and 11. And we've kind of morphed. More and more people know about it. I am not going to spend a lot of time on this podcast going section by section, although I do sometimes talk about it. But the big things are, and I'll stay away from section 1 and 2, which is the kind of the reporting and finances. Certainly 3 is about statement of programs. Really is about 4, 5, 6, and 7. So section 4 is all about the required schedules. There are all of these schedules, A through, I think, is it N or O anymore? Maybe even P, that only have to be filled out depending on the type of nonprofit you are. That's only important from the perspective of clarifying what you should and shouldn't fill out and what has to be disclosed. But I can't believe how many times I say these things and they go, oh, we fill them all out. I'm like, you don't have to. You only fill out the ones that you're required to. The part 5 is where we talk about IRS filings and tax compliance. More and more, there's a discussion going on about the fact that nonprofits don't pay taxes. Most of the time, not at the local or state level. For sure, they don't pay income tax through the Fed or IRS. But with that grace comes a responsibility. And in healthcare, it's being pushed more heavily probably than anywhere else, particularly if you have services that you get reimbursed for or you charge for, tuition for university or a school, healthcare in terms of insurance and Medicaid, Medicare, is this idea of community benefit. This is where we have the discussion about, in the compliance side, what are you doing to be worthy of not paying income tax or corporate tax on the entity? And that means you have a responsibility to help the community. And this is where we begin to see this. More and more, this is becoming an important discussion because governmental agencies are saying, look, we're giving you, particularly as these healthcare and education primarily driving the size and scope of a concern, are getting so big that they're like, and by the way, systematized, more distant from their local execution of their mission, hospitals, education, that are you actually delivering community benefit? Are you helping the community in various ways that you are required to do if you don't have to pay taxes? And this is a conversation we need to have more often. The 990 drives the reporting of that. And then the community benefit reports that are required that come out of that. And so you might want to have more conversations, discussions with your board about this because it's being pushed. Part 7, I just want to spend a second about, part 6 is governance, management, and disclosure. Who's managing? Who's leading? Do you have all the policies? Do you do the right things? Do you meet? Do you keep copies of minutes? Things of that nature. And then part 7 is compensation and connection to independent contractors as well as donors. We are seeing more and more pressure by the IRS to disclose more facts about the people working in the organization, the people that you're paying. And the real one that we're just kind of pushing into, there is a requirement which has been kind of nebulous about reporting your largest donors. Of course, if you sign a gift agreement that there's anonymity, then that becomes really hard. Section 7 is all about this confluence or connection or conflict, depending on the issue, in reporting out about who gets paid, how do they get paid, and who's giving to you. You might want to pay more attention to this because we're seeing more and more pressure from the IRS to be more open. They don't have a police force per se, although they're hiring a ton of agents over the next 10 years. They want the community to be the community-based policing agency to report in when they see something that's odd or different. And that's why they're saying there has to be more disclosure. I'm going to stop with the 990, but what I am going to say is it's really, really important that you are reviewing this 990 as an executive or a leader about your organization. And if you're on the board, it should be discussed and brought out and having expert brought in to talk about it. Usually it's an auditor of some sort to talk not only about the finances, but about what we're reporting and what's in there. And most of the time, I think it's become almost second nature. Like, oh yeah, we did a 990. Do you know what's in it? No. How can you be a fiduciary or an executive leader and not have an idea of what's in the 990? And so a little more push into that would be a good thing for all of us. Now we kind of begin to move, once we've talked about the duties, we've talked about kind of the reporting that's required by IRS, the 990, is now into kind of the policies. The first policy that I always think that's most important is your gift and acceptance policy. And I've written a number of these for clients. And really, it's not the easy things that are the problem. And really the gift acceptance policy is, how do we take money in? What do we do when we take it in? And it may not actually be money, it's gifts. The easy things are, cash or stocks. I mean, a stock gift, we all know you value by the high and the low of the day in which you received it. I mean, or cash has a certain value. That's all easy. Really, what gift acceptance policies, when they're done correctly, are all about are dealing with unacceptable gifts, are the things you don't take care of, that you don't take, or what are the more complicated gifts, i.e., things like real estate. And how do you do that? Because I don't want the CEO or the chief development officer being the sole decision maker about real estate. There's some real estate you shouldn't take. And by the way, out of that comes reporting of 8281 forms, 8282 forms. Those things become more complicated, and we're going to see more land gifts as people's land, houses, farms, businesses becomes more valuable. They can make those as charitable gifts and estates, and that may be one of the bigger opportunities that they have. The other thing gift acceptance policies do is start covering things around, what things do you offer? Do you do annuities or charitable remainder trusts, bargain sales? And who are the people that need to be a part of those conversations? I'm very rarely surprised when I say, do you have a gift acceptance policy, when either they've got a gift situation or, I'm doing an audit or we're being a campaign and I want to kind of make sure we got everything in line. And they say, absolutely. And I'm like, so when was the last time you looked at it? And there's like blank stares. I'm not saying you need to review this every day, but if you're not doing an annual kind of, hey, let's kind of check through this, make sure nothing's changed. If it's not coming up to the board every 1 or 2 years, like, hey, we just want to make sure we're got everything lined up, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So make sure those gift acceptance policies are appropriately completed and reviewed. One area of gift acceptance policies, or it could be a standalone, are events. And this is really interesting if you're a smaller nonprofit, because they depend more on these gifts that come in from auctions and galas and golf tournaments. There are certainly requirements for that. A lot of times you'll find those in gift acceptance policies, but I bring them out here. Things like poker tournaments cause problems when you start paying for cash, like you're a casino and you're a nonprofit. Can't do that. Or you have a silent auction and they donate something like as a gift in kind, and you put a value on it. You can't do that. You're not in the appraisal business. That's for them to disclose how much it's worth and up to them to figure it out. Also, we have things around golf tournaments and value of things purchased and auctions. And by the way, if a donor makes a gift above $250, whether they bought something or not, they need a written acknowledgement. And I run into smaller nonprofits where like, they bought something for $1,000. You send them a note or a letter? No, they bought it. That's not how this works. So all of these little aspects are important to realize because they lead to bigger problems, and you want to make sure that you're aligned correctly in terms of doing business the right way. So events are something to be aware of. A couple of other quick policies that you probably could mirror a governing organization, or if you need to on your own, but you need to have is your whistleblower policy, which allows people who see something that might be problematic, whether that's harassment or financial misdoing or any kind of other act that doesn't meet basic humanistic standards when we think about what we want in employees. They have to have a place to be able to go and say, I see a problem, and they have to feel safe in doing that. If you're a foundation at a hospital or foundation, let's say, and maybe smaller, like in a school district, you're supporting the school district, or a separate foundation from a university, you can use the universities or the school districts or the hospitals' whistleblower policies, because they have very established ones almost every time. So you don't have to recreate the wheel. You just have to know how to allow your employees or your board or volunteers a place to be concerned. The other thing I will comment on is that things like document destruction policies investment policies, travel and expense policies are critical. And yet, most of the time, I think organizations have them, but what they don't do is review them, and nobody knows what they say and what the process is. All of these things are done from 990s to duties of care to these policies because they're there to do one thing that has two parts. Number one, it's to protect the organization. Number two, it's to protect the staff. If staff and the board follow the policies, generally there's not a lot of problems. Where the problems arise is when we tend to take a leap of faith and go somewhere else. If you don't know some of the things I'm talking about, go ask someone and say, where is our investment policy? And read it. Or I don't know what's in our gift acceptance policy. Go find it and read it. Most of the time, I think organizations have the broad parameters. People don't know what the heck they are. And I think the key here is to ensure you know what policies are required and know what's in them to make sure you're doing the right things. And by the way, to protect yourself. That's what I told gift officers. These policies, particularly gift acceptance, are not there to hurt you. They're there to help you so you don't get yourself in trouble. I truly believe that. And that's how we build trust with our community, back to where we started. Because if we don't have trust, we have a tough time existing and acquiring, partnering to find that all-important dollar, or lots of them, to make our missions possible to help other people. May seem basic, but you'd be surprised if you start asking questions what you don't know. Don't forget, check out the blogs, 90-second reads. Get them at Hallett Philanthropy. Get an RSS feed right to your inbox. That's at hallettphilanthropy.com under the blogs tab. And if you'd like to reach out to me, it's podcast@hallettphilanthropy.com. Don't forget what you do is important. And today we talked about some of the foundational things that are required to do what you're doing, to build trust, that basic governance, policies, principles, processes that are so important. I just brought up a few of the bigger ones. But when we have those things, it doesn't mean it automatically happens. It takes you as a volunteer, as a leader, as a staff member to really do what is my all-time favorite saying. Some people make things happen. Some people watch things happen. Then there are those who wondered what happened. And at the end of the day, even with the best policies, procedures, and everything else, and all the trust in the world, if you're not someone who's making things happen, making phone calls, going to see people, building relationships, talking about the value of what your organization does, and listening to what the community wants and finding that connection, if you're not doing that, then you're not helping the people who are wondering what happened. That's the mission of what nonprofit work's all about. Love of mankind, helping others. Lean into that. Go take that little extra step in being someone who makes things happen, because in doing so, you'll cause a lot of positive outcome impact for the people and the things we want the most and believe in the most, those people and entities that are wondering what happened. That connection is philanthropy at its finest. Appreciate your time today, and I'll certainly look forward to you joining me again next time right here on Around with Randall. Don't forget, make it a great day.